Oh God, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space, were it not that I have bad dreams. Helpless, tied to a table, and trapped within a darkened room, along with a monster, Tsukiko, now at the mercy of a horror that feeds on the suffering and torment of her victims, an abomination that cannot die, with a head regrowing and bulging from the stump of its neck, laughing hysterically as it began to face Tsukiko, the girl who would be foolish enough to cross its path of beautiful destruction, drinking in Tsukiko's fear as it began reaching out for the terrified girl, wrapping its hands around her neck, embracing the terror within Tsukiko's eyes before watching her miserable little life fade away. The worst thing about nightmares isn't the experience, but finding yourself waking up to an actual nightmare. Something that Tsukiko quickly learned when seeing how her room was still decorated with Tomie's blood. What happened was supposed to be a dream, and regardless of how much effort Tsukiko tried denying the reality of the recent events, the murder that had taken place within her own room, Daichi and Kimata making an attempt on her life before leaving with Tomie's head, and even witnessing Tomie's decapitated body come alive and run out the front door, only to find herself waking up and realizing that it wasn't a dream. Everything that happened was real. With the phone line being cut, Tsukiko had no other choice but to use a payphone down the street to reach her father before going to the authorities. After Daichi and Kimata returned Tomie's head to her father, they were a bit confused as to why the head demanded to be burnt at first, until the other face awakened and demanded to be taken to her mansion home. Either way, right now, both Kimata and Daichi had some unfinished business in regards to having Tsukiko killed. Can't have any witnesses left alive. But aside from that, it seemed like our boys were being shadowed by a familiar stranger. If they're not mistaken, it was that Yamazaki guy at school, who is also under Tomie's spell, and desperately seeking out her whereabouts. It was when Tsukiko would reach the payphone, she would overhear the sounds of commotion within the lower street. It was Daichi and Kimata violently attacking Yamazaki, punishing the ignorant fool who failed to kill Tsukiko. In fact, nobody even asked Yamazaki to kill Tsukiko. Tomie's issues with Tsukiko was none of his damn business. And standing over the broken man, clenching in pain after enduring a severe beating, Yamazaki was left with nothing but a warning to stay out of their way and leave Tomie alone. And as Tsukiko hid and watched Daichi and Kimata make their way to her apartment to finish the job, that was when she immediately rushed to Yamazaki. After what happened yesterday at school, how he tried killing Tsukiko and receiving a violent beating from Tomie's goons, Tsukiko still had feelings for this pitiful man. Sure, Yamazaki may not understand why Tsukiko would help him after what happened, but Tsukiko knew that what happened because of Tomie. Tsukiko also knew that, like Daichi and Kimata, Yamazaki was a victim to Tomie's charms. Somehow, someway, she was controlling these men as if they were her playthings. As expected, it was only a matter of time before Daichi and Kimata would learn that Tsukiko had escaped. Immediately, Tsukiko began moving Yamazaki right beneath the stairs when overhearing Tomie's goons on the streets above, who are not only trying to find Tsukiko, but also Yamazaki as well, regretting the idea of letting him live with a mere warning, when in fact, the man was now an accomplice, and they can't allow that. Even though it was a miracle that Tomie's goons didn't find Tsukiko and Yamazaki hiding below them at the bottom of the stairs, that was when the two men decided to separate and begin searching the north and the south side of the town. The man that Tsukiko had deeply fallen for tried murdering her, and yet she still had feelings for Yamazaki. She knew why he did it, that he was possessed under Tomie's spell, and now a man who is beaten, broken, and under her care, and pleading for Tsukiko to turn him in for what he had done. It was a tough decision for Tsukiko, but regardless of the fact that there were two killers trying to hunt her down, and that Yamazaki may try killing her again, Tsukiko decided to take the risk, and hesitated on calling her parents and the authorities. She didn't want to see Yamazaki go into jail for something that wasn't his fault. According to Tsukiko, it wasn't Yamazaki who tried killing her, it was Tomie. That's how she does it. Tomie prefers having other men do her dirty work and take the fall. Except this time, Tsukiko is going to do everything she can to make sure that Yamazaki doesn't fall victim to Tomie. When bringing Yamazaki back to her apartment, Tsukiko would be greeted by the results of Tomie's goons destroying her room. Fact is, Tsukiko had a goal, but not a plan. She was taking a huge risk not going to the authorities, especially the fact that she was bringing Yamazaki to her house, who was still under Tomie's spell. After taking Yamazaki to the other bedroom so he can recover from his wounds, Tsukiko began to go through the remains of her destroyed room, realizing that Daichi and Kimata were looking for the camera when noticing that it was missing. Idiots. How can Tsukiko take pictures if she was tied up? When evening came, Tsukiko spent most of her day tending to Yamazaki, who wasn't getting any better. The man had a fever. Every now and then he would have these delusional episodes, waking up from his sleep, claiming that he could hear Tomie calling his name, but only finding Tsukiko. Yamazaki didn't understand. He tried killing Tsukiko, and yet here she is, caring for him. Tsukiko has every reason to hate Yamazaki, and she rather show kindness instead. And Tsukiko, realizing how late it was, that she should start cooking some rice to make sure that Yamazaki has something to eat. Yamazaki was a frightened man. He didn't want Tsukiko to leave him, because he was very afraid, which is why he asked Tsukiko to stay with him for a while longer. Nothing to be afraid of, except outside in the streets are two gentlemen looking at Tsukiko's apartment after spending the whole day searching for Tsukiko. Daichi and Kimata had finally found her. Rather than dwelling on the idea of Tomie's goons making their way back to her apartment, Tsukiko was more worried about Yamazaki's fever, which had gotten worse before he fell asleep. And it was without notice, Yamazaki had suddenly awakened, as if he had just endured a nightmare, claiming that he could still hear her, Tomie calling his name. And as he grabbed Tsukiko, held her tightly, trying to convince her that he could still hear Tomie calling his name, that she was somewhere within this apartment. Yamazaki was scared, but he felt safe within Tsukiko's arms. And even though Tsukiko couldn't hear anything, she tried calming down Yamazaki by bringing him back into reality, telling him that he was suffering from a fever dream, looking Yamazaki in the eyes, telling him that Tomie isn't here. She's gone now. There is nobody here except herself and Yamazaki. In that moment of being in each other's arms, how Tsukiko dreamed of this, regardless of the recent events that brought them here. It was a moment where the horrors had subsided, slowly fading away as she was just seconds away from embracing her love for Yamazaki with a kiss. Until Yamazaki would suddenly panic, throw himself into a frenzy when hearing the loud cries for his name. It was her, Tomie, screaming his name. Yamazaki was petrified and helpless to her pleas, and watching the man run out of the room and into the hallway, Tsukiko couldn't understand what was happening. She couldn't hear anything. Not sure if it was the effects of the fever, Yamazaki being delusional, or that he was still under Tomie's spell. And as Yamazaki found his way to Tsukiko's room, following Tomie's voice, Tsukiko tried stopping him from entering her room, and watching Yamazaki screaming for Tomie had given Tsukiko a dwelling fear. There was no Tomie in her room, or anywhere in the house. She was gone, her body, her head, gone. But watching Yamazaki being led into the very room she was killed in, Tsukiko began to realize that something was happening. And her inner fears would be confirmed when noticing the blood-stained carpet begin to swell, watching Yamazaki tend to it, the very spot where Tomie died. Once again, Tsukiko began struggling with reality when hearing the sounds of hands ripping through the carpet, female hands reaching out to Yamazaki, and then the face pushing itself through the carpet to greet her lover. It was Tomie, who wanted to be with her beloved Yamazaki, to hold him, to embrace his love for her, to be the one who would give him a kiss. And noticing the foolish girl watching, to think that she could steal her precious Yamazaki. No, Yamazaki belongs to Tomie. His lips are now hers, and Tsukiko being nothing more but a mere witness. I guess she outlived her usefulness. The pitiful little girl just doesn't get it. Yamazaki's love is for Tomie, and there is nothing Tsukiko can do about it. And just as Tsukiko tried breaking Yamazaki from Tomie's spell, that was when her attempt to save Yamazaki would be interrupted by the sounds of something striking her bedroom window. It was Kimata, who had somehow scaled the building, and when he made a second blow against the window with a steel pipe, that was when the glass shards flew everywhere within the room. After wasting a whole day, Kimata had finally found the foolish girl, and even Yamazaki as well, both of them in the same room. How convenient that Tsukiko would be living on the upper floor. Might throw her over the balcony, make it look like a suicide, or maybe, better yet, Kimata will make it look like Yamazaki had succeeded his original goals and throw him over the balcony after killing Tsukiko, make it look like a murder-suicide. And just as Kimata was about to attack Yamazaki with a steel pipe, who was still protecting his beloved Tomie, that was when Tomie demanded that Kimata stop what he was doing. Tomie's pathetic henchman. If he and Daichi weren't so incompetent, she would have never found herself in this situation, trapped in the floor, with glass shards all over her face. Kimata, so rude, indecent, so pathetic. Not even half the man as her precious Yamazaki. And even though Kimata tried tending to Tomie, overwhelmed with pain and grief as she scolded the man for his ignorance and inability to be useful, rather than having his filthy hands help her from the floor, between Kimata and Daichi, Tomie has no use of Kimata, which is why she demanded that Kimata take his pipe and go away. Far away. And as Daichi waited in the streets below for Kimata to finish the job, so he could find Yamazaki before returning to Miss Tomie in her mansion home, that was when he noticed someone on Tsukiko's balcony, climbing the rails. And when Daichi got a good look at who it was Kimata, who just leapt off and fell to his death. Poor Yamazaki, cowering in the corner, knowing that he was helpless to an evil that had its claws into him. The man was helpless against Tomie's demands to be held, to be free, and immediately rushing to his beloved Tomie, Yamazaki desperately tried finding a way to free Tomie from the floor, tearing and ripping as much carpet as he could. And just as he thought that there was enough to pull Tomie free, somehow her body was embedded to the floor, all because of that foolish girl, Tsukiko. And even though Yamazaki tried everything he could to free Tomie and Yamazaki can live out their lives together in this very room, their little love nest, have children, raise a family. This room will be their whole world, the very place where Yamazaki will die in. And as Yamazaki remained oblivious to Tsukiko's attempts to free him from Tomie's charms, it was no use. Yamazaki belongs to Tomie. And as Yamazaki tried removing the glass from Tomie's beautiful face, ignoring her pleas to leave them be, Yamazaki began to panic when seeing the blood jetting from her face. Yamazaki was determined to free Tomie, and grabbing a large piece of glass, Yamazaki was going to cut her free and live happily ever after. But just as the glass penetrated Tomie's flesh, blood began to spray everywhere within the room, gushing from Tomie's pale body. And to Yamazaki's horror, Tomie began deflating. Once again, Tomie had died within Tsukiko's room. A few days after the incident, both Tsukiko and Yamazaki were considered prime suspects to at least one murder. At least, meaning that the authorities strongly believed that there was more than one victim involved. And even though Tsukiko told the authorities everything that happened, how Tomie was killed, only to have her headless body coming back to life, how Daichi and Kimata tried having Tsukiko murdered, and how Tomie came out of the carpet, and how she made Kimata jump from her bedroom window. Tsukiko told the authorities everything, except how she was almost killed by Yamazaki, and as expected, the authorities didn't believe it. And even though the evidence was painting a different story, however, from what the authorities could gather from this incident, nothing about this case made any sense. Because of how there were witnesses who saw Kimata fall to his death, and a few who saw him scale the building, the authorities were forced to leave Kimata's death as a suicide. However, Daichi was still missing, nowhere to be found. As for the blood and the remains of Tomie's body, yes, the blood was confirmed human, however, it cannot be connected to Tomie. Tomie isn't dead, because the day after the incident, she showed up at school to withdraw from her term. It's also confirmed that Tomie was never at the scene, seeing how she was with her father at her mansion home. And even though authorities found it interesting that Tomie admitted that there was a dispute between herself and Tsukiko that resulted with Tsukiko being suspended, the fact that Tomie has no knowledge of the incident, nor Daichi and Kimata wanting to have Tsukiko killed, kinda raised a lot of suspicion on Tsukiko and Yamazaki, a possible motive to a murder gone horribly wrong. And as for the body, which turns out wasn't a body, but a vinyl sheet that was underneath the carpet, it's strongly believed that this may have been used as a murder weapon because of the facial imprint that was found on the sheet. And even though the case made absolutely no sense, and the authorities strongly believe that both Yamazaki and Tsukiko are responsible for Daichi missing, and they cannot ignore the amount of blood that was found within the room, which wasn't Daichi's blood type, even if Tsukiko and Yamazaki had done something. Because of the fact that there's no body, there are way too many riddles. Obviously, Tsukiko can't share any more details, and most of all, there's no victim. The authorities were left with no other option but leave the case unsolved. Tsukiko felt fully responsible for everything that happened. Maybe it was because of her illicit activities at school, or letting her emotions get the better of her when getting involved with something like Tomie. Either way, Tsukiko had learned a lot from this incident and vowed to change her ways. Because of how she felt weird living at the apartment, sleeping in the same room where everything happened, Tsukiko and her mother decided that it would be best if she were to live with her father. Thankfully, her mother decided to take out the bloodstained carpet from Tsukiko's room and have it tossed away somewhere. As for Yamazaki, who was sent to the hospital for his injuries, was feeling much better now, more enlightened that he was recovering from Tomie's control, and could now focus on trying to forget about her. Yamazaki was truly grateful for everything Tsukiko had done for him, all the trouble she had went through, just for him. That thing in the carpet was nothing but Tomie's drained blood that had seeped through the floor and used the sheet as skin when coming alive, meaning that when Tomie kissed Yamazaki, it wasn't really her lips. The only thing that Tsukiko was relieved about. A happy ending for this story. Tsukiko recovering from a traumatic experience after crossing an evil that thrives on the suffering and torment of her victims. Except, Tomie isn't the kind of evil that prefers to let things go so easily. You see, when it comes to Tomie, there is no escape, and the idea of a happy ending is just a mere fable. Yamazaki belongs to Tomie, and he knows it. He can still feel Tomie, because outside of his room in the hospital is this familiar carpet within the dump nearby. For a few days, Yamazaki has been watching this carpet carefully, and when seeing the swelling, the movement, that was when Yamazaki knew that an omen had turned into a reality. Yamazaki spending his days at the window, reluctantly observing the carpet. Lots of swelling and movement, noticing the darkened spots, the heads emerging. Something was happening. People just walking by, not noticing what was happening within the dump. The creatures growing from the carpet. Yamazaki was terrified, and yet he didn't want to tell anyone. Because sooner or later, the time will come. These things will finally notice him. And when that time comes, they will turn around and reach out for their beloved Yamazaki, wanting to be held. And there is nothing Yamazaki can do about it. He was helpless because Yamazaki belongs to Tomie. And when Yamazaki was seen leaving the hospital, that was the last time anybody had seen Yamazaki alive.